Okay, today's stuff we're going to be learning is Yevamot Daf Lamed Zayin. This month's learning is sponsored by Dora Chanahar and family for the Refuah Shlema of Chava Nami Bat Chana. A few announcements about Pesach. So if you didn't see yesterday, I already put up the daf for Shabbat, first day of Pesach. If anybody wants to learn it, it's a little out of order, but if you're you want to get started, the beginning of the daf will be a drop confusing, but then it should be fine after that. And so plus I did a bit of a review, so it should be okay. And I'll do the same thing next week. I'll put it up a few days earlier, probably by Tuesday, I'll put it up for the second set of Chagim. Those in Chutz La'aretz, so you'll have to, the Shiur will be up only after, but if you want to listen to last time cycle, you can just search on the website, Yevamot 41, and you can listen to last cycle's Shiur. And the Zoom will continue as usual, other than the days where it's actually Shabbat and next Friday and Shabbat. And, so this Friday, Erev Pesach, there will be a Zoom class and Shiur will go up after that. And one last thing. Oh, Monday, there won't be a regular Zoom either. And that Shiur I'll put up early Monday morning. Okay, let's get started with our daf. So we started at the end of yesterday's daf with Rav Ashi saying to Rav Shai Bereg, Rav Idi, we kind of ended in the middle because he didn't really get to his question yet. He brought up a Mishnah where it talked about this idea of a child who was born. Remember, we have this case where somebody died. They did, right? The truth is, Rashbag was just talking in general. He said, if a baby dies within the first 30 days, we don't know if it was Ben Kayam or not. Rashbag actually didn't say this, but it was inferred from what he said. What he said is, once the child passes 30 days, we know for sure that it's a Ben Kayama. Okay, once he passes day 30. And it's not a nefel, which is, what they believed, an 8th-month baby who can never be viable. But if for some reason it died within 30 days, then we can assume he must have assumed it's a suffix. Okay, that's Rashbag. We're going to see the rabbis. They don't actually bring the rabbis, but the rabbis disagree. And it actually appears elsewhere in the Gemara. Once you have a tinok ben yomo, 1 day old, there's already no obligation of yibum anymore. Okay, we assume that child was viable, even though it only lived 1 day, unless you know that it was, an 8th-month baby. So now, but Rashbag thinks less than 30 days, it's suffix. And then it had said, what's the relevance of this? Well, if a woman, right, if mate, betoch shloshim yom, the baby dies, and she goes and gets married, based on really, right, according to the rabbis, this would be fine. Because once ben yomo, you're patur from yibum. But according to Rashbag, it's a problem because it's a suffix. So now, because it's a suffix, and we don't know, could she go get married, or does she need to take care of yibum or chalitza? So Ravina Mishmei de Rava, Ravina in the name of Rava says, we're going to have a machlok at what Rava held. Im eshet Yisraeli choletzet, im eshet kohen ena choletzet. If she was married to a Yisrael, then we make her do chalitza, because really, what's the difference? We just make her do chalitza, and that's why we're on the safe side, because we don't know whether the baby was viable or the baby wasn't viable. If the baby wasn't viable, she would be chayav in yibum. She obviously can't do yibum because she's already engaged, betrothed to somebody else, so we have her do chalitza. And if she's married to a Kohen, she'll be stuck. She won't be able to stay married to him because she'll be like a divorcee. Remember, we treat a chalutza like a divorcee. She can't marry a Kohen. Comes Rabbi Sharsha and says in the name of Rava also, he says, no, what are you talking about? Rava said something else. Echad zo ve'echad zo choletza. Both have to do chalitza, even in Esha Kohen, which means she won't be able to go back to her original husband. So Amarle Ravina le Rabbi Sharsha, starting now from the bottom of Lamed Vavam, we got the last few words. Ravina now says to Rabbi Sharsha, you're right that Rava said what you said, Rava said, but that was at night. The next morning, I was there also, and he changed his mind. And he said, no, right? This is always dangerous when people change their minds, and not everybody always hears. We had this the other day about people hearing part, but not hearing the announcement, right? That her chalitza wasn't relevant, right? So sometimes, you miss part of it and you miss something major. So Ramashashia, so basically he says, Rava changed his mind and doesn't make an Eshet Kohen have to do chalitza and then won't be able to go back to her husband. To which Rava Sharsha responds very harshly and says, Sharitu, you want to permit this? If you permit this, yay, Rava detishru af tarba. You're going to end up, what, you want to permit chelev, which are clearly forbidden fats? Okay, there's a big debate about what this word tarba is. Is it tarba, which means chelev? Does it mean something else within the chelev world? Is it what's this connection to chelev? Some people says it's tarka, which is a grusha. In other words, you're going to permit this woman, you're going to end up permitting a grusha to a Kohen. In other words, right, he's very upset, a divorcee. So whatever he says, the point is, he says, what on earth are you talking about, right? You can't just permit this. This is serious. So hachanami, so now, this was all, okay, remember we got here because Rav Ashi says to Rav Shai Bered Rav Idi, he quoted this whole thing. So far, this was just a quote. He quoted this Mishnah with Rashbag's opinion. Then he quoted the debate between the what Rava actually held. Does this apply to an Eshet Kohen or not? And here comes his question that he's finally asking. Do we say the same thing? This law that we saw yesterday, this seemingly strange law that if a woman's pregnant or nursing, we don't allow her to get remarried during that whole time period because we're worried that the husband will want her to get pregnant. And then basically her milk will dry up. It'll put this child's life in danger. So and then what did the halacha say? If you remember, there was a machloket, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Rabbi Meir said, you have to divorce her and you can never stay remarried to her if you did this. Okay, if you married her anyway, make you divorce her and can't stay married. Number two, we have the rabbis who say, well, you divorce her, but when the 24 months are up after nursing, you can go back and remarry her. So now the same question here. What if it's a woman, a wife of a Kohen? Then what do? Do we also make him divorce? Or both opinions say divorce. One says you can never remarry her, but the rabbis say you can go back and remarry her after that time period ends. So if she's married to a Kohen, do we say the same thing? Because then you won't be able to remarry her because she's a divorcee. So Amar Le, he says back to him, Rav Shaya, this right who Rav Ashi asks, says, Hachi Ashta, what are you comparing? You're comparing two very different cases. What's the difference? There, and that's what I mentioned, the rabbis disagree with Rashbag entirely and say, once the child's 1 day old, it's not a problem, right? That there's no chiyuv of yibum. She doesn't need to do chalitza. So there's an opinion that basically says you don't need to do anything. So therefore, even if we hold like Rashbag, in a unique case, if someone is married to a Kohen, so as not to mess them up, we don't make her do chalitza. So there, right, even though you don't wave, it's a perfectly good, right, the child is fine. So in other words, we assume the child was viable. So yes, we'd rather be stringent like Rashbag, we'd rather be stringent and say, to be on the safe side, do chalitza. But in this case, we don't have a good choice. We don't have a good option to do chalitza. We'll mess her up and they won't be able to stay married. Then we can rely on the rabbis. But in this case, both said, with Rabbi Meir and the rabbi said, you have to get divorced, right? Nobody said not divorcing was an option. So, right, Rabbi Meir, if you're going to say we hold like Rabbi Meir, well, he says you can never remarry her. Forget Kohen, the wife of a Kohen. No one can get remarried in this case. And Rabbanan ha'amri beget. He said you have to give a get. So basically, you can't compare the cases. It's not a good question. And obviously, then in Eshet Kohen, according to Rav Shaya, Bered Rav Idi, an Eshet Kohen would have to get divorced as well in this case. Okay, so I guess you should just know in the beginning not to end up in this situation because then you'll really be in trouble. Itmar. Now we get to a machloket. Kidsha betoch shlosha ubarach. What if she gets betrothed to this man within 3 months and then he runs away? Now he did something wrong because he shouldn't. Now we're talking about a case where, right, her husband died and we're supposed to wait a 3-month time period and they don't wait. And he betroths her. Now betrothal, remember, is only the beginning. Right? The issue is the child. Child can only happen once they're married because when you're only betrothed, you can't actually be together. So and then he runs away. You're not supposed to do the kiddushin either within the 3 months, but it's not as bad as the nisuin. So now, if he runs away, we have to put him in excommunication because he did something wrong. He shouldn't have married her within the 3 months. Right? Often also when people go against rabbinic institution, right, a rabbinic decree, the rabbis say, if you're not going to listen to the rabbis, we're going to put you in excommunication because you're doing something against the rabbis. Right? They were very protective. Saw this the other day of rabbinic law because people often took it not so seriously. So this guy did something he shouldn't have done. We have to put him in excommunication. The fact that he ran away is proof that he obviously wasn't planning on actually marrying her during the 3-month period. So it's fine. You can leave him alone. Okay. From the fact that he runs away, that's his best proof. Why else would he run away if he wasn't planning to marry her within these 3 months? And then it's fine because then they're not going to have relations. They won't have a child. And that was the whole concern. Hava Uvda, there was in fact a case for Amar le Rafram, and Rafram said, Eruke Misatye. Okay. His running away is the best proof that he's obviously not intending to marry her yet. And therefore it's okay. You don't need to excommunicate him. Now we get back to this Mishnah, and here I think as women, you're going to appreciate this sugya very much. If you didn't already think of these issues before, and we started talking about this, Safek 9-month baby, Safek 7-month baby, aren't there other ways you can figure it out? Like if she was showing, right, you can kind of know, most people know whether they're 9 months pregnant or 7 months pregnant. If he ran away, by the way, this case about running away, I see you're asking about a guna. I'm assuming he's going to show up on the scene again. He just ran away right now, till this 3-month period passes. That seems to be what they're talking about. Okay. Because remember, okay, let me just clarify. The issue here is, do we make it, remember, the halacha is, if you did that, he has to divorce her. So if he only did kiddushin and not nisuin, do we make him give her a get, or can we just wait and assume that he's going to show up back again and he'll end up marrying her, going through with it once the 3 months are passed, and then he really didn't do anything wrong because he wasn't ever really planning to be married to her. Then he was just betrothing her the first stage, but not actually marrying her. That's really the issue here. They're not really getting into aguna issues. The assumption is going to show up back on the scene. The Mishnah had said something which the Gemara is going to have some halachic issue with, which is, it seemed pretty reasonable when we read it in the Mishnah. Safek, the last line in our Mishnah, Lamed Hamabin. Safek ben Tisha L'Rishon, Safek ben Shiva L'Chavon. Right? We have this child that's born. Remember, the husband dies without children. She then is supposed to wait for 3 months to see if she's pregnant. She doesn't wait the 3 months. She gets married right away, and she does yibum right away. And now we have a problem because it turns out she's pregnant. We don't know, is it from this husband or from the previous husband? If it's from the previous husband, then there's no laws of yibum. If there's no laws of yibum, what's the problem? She can't be married to her husband's brother. That's isur karet, and right, big problem. So the Mishnah had said a few things, which is, number one, if she married him anyway within the 3-month period, and then she turns out she was pregnant, she has to get divorced because maybe her husband really had a child. Maybe this child's from her husband. And if so, she can't marry his brother. But the child born from, we don't know which union, but either it was from the first husband, perfectly legitimate child, born from a perfectly good marriage. If the child is from the second marriage, it's also perfectly valid because that means she was obligated in yibum. She did yibum, and great. So the child is fine no matter what. The issue is, chayavim ba'asham talulim. This is going to be a big question. Because they don't know, right? When we read it, it seemed pretty reasonable. They don't know whether she was obligated in yibum or not. If she was obligated in yibum, it was fine. She doesn't need to bring a sin offering. She didn't do anything wrong. If the child was really from the first husband and she wasn't obligated in yibum, she did something that's isur karet, which is very serious. She can't marry your husband's brother. So basically, we're now stuck because we don't know, did she do something that requires a sin offering or not? So she brings an asham talud, which is hanging, as if you translate it literally, guilt offering, which is what you bring if you're not sure if you did a sin that would obligate you in a chatat. Okay. So Lema, why don't we just say, now we've learned this in many sugyot before, and we'll learn this in many more. There's something called majority rules, right? We go by the majority of cases. Now, okay, this is, as women, I think we can relate. Lema halacha charov nashim. Why don't we just say we go by the rov, the majority? Majority of women, rov nashim l'tish'a yeladan. Right? Most women give birth after 9 months. So that means likely this baby was belonging to the first husband, which means she wasn't obligated in yibum, which means she should bring a korban chatat, not an asham taloi. We don't really know. It's much more close to for sure she did something wrong than maybe she did something wrong. So Amarle, very strange answer. Rav Nachman answers, Nashe didan l'shiva yalad. The women in our home give birth after 7 months. Okay. Now, first of all, that's not so uncommon. There's people who are prone to early deliveries, right? And give birth early. So he says that's the rov by us. It's not a really good answer though, because what does that affect halacha everywhere, right? Just because your family is like that doesn't mean anything about other people. So Amarle, what? The women in your family are the majority of the world? Like, look around you. There's most women, right? Maybe he was using his experience as telling about the world and saying, well, maybe it's 50-50. I don't know. So he said, what are you talking about? It's not Rov HaOlam. We should still go by 9 months. So Amarle Hachi Kamina, he says, no, that's not what I meant, which makes sense because it was a strange answer anyway. So he corrects what he said. And he says, this is what I meant. Rav Nashim Yeladan Letisha, Umi'u L'Shiva. It's true. Most women do give birth after 9 months, minority 7 months. But there's another assumption, and we're going to assume that didn't happen here. What is that? Anyone who gives birth after 9 months, okay, right? In general, after 3 months, most women are showing. Vizo, now we're going to have to assume, and this is why I say you might have thought of this before, this woman, if obviously we're not sure if it's a 7-month baby or a 9-month baby, she must not have been showing after 3 months, because if she was, it would be clear she was showing from the first child. And therefore, itra la ruba. Her rov gets weakened. In other words, if she had been showing after 3 months, we go with rov. We'd say, okay, so you're showing after 3 months. Most women show after 3 months. You're showing, and right, most women give birth 9 months. Then we'd actually say chatat for sure. But this woman wasn't showing it. Because she wasn't showing, that raises the question. In other words, it weakens our rov. Even though most women give birth after 9 months, the fact that she's not showing indicates that maybe the rov isn't working here for her. And that's why we have a suffix. But that's still not satisfying. Because now notice they didn't say most women show after 9 months. They said all after 3 months. They said all 9-month babies show after 3 months. Okay, by the way, they get this from Tamar, who says after 3 months, they knew she was pregnant, right? And the whole thing happened after that when she basically goes out and says, listen, I'm pregnant. So, if we assume, right, the assumption is all women who are 9 months, right, 9-month babies show after 3 months, then it should be very simple, right? If that's the case, right, then we should assume that it was a definite 7-month baby. If she's not showing after the 3 months after her husband died, it should be obvious that she's a 7-month baby. Ela Ema, right now, I see already in the chat this is going on, and obviously you're all thinking about this, which is Ela Ema. So now they say, no, that's not what I meant. It should be most women show after 3 months, right? We all know some people show after a month, some people show after. Okay, I have a friend who, crazy story, and it's really true. Okay, even though you might say there's no way. I have a friend in her first birth. She did not know she was pregnant until she was 9 months pregnant. Okay, she had no idea that was the case. Okay, hard to believe, but she really didn't know. Okay, and only at 9 months she wasn't showing at all, and and she's very thin, and nobody, right? She didn't even know. So okay, I'm not going to get into all of it, but whatever. It's a crazy story. So now, so now, since most women show after 3 months for 9-month babies, since this woman wasn't, so now the rov goes down, right? So again, we can't go by rov because she was a little different than the majority, which sounds basically like they're saying, if she was showing after 3 months, then we'd assume it was a 9-month baby for her first husband. And the cases that we're discussing here are really where it's not very clear, where she wasn't showing yet. And that's why we have this doubt, and we just don't know to who does the child belong. By the way, this would also be a doubt if she gets married a week later or 2 weeks later, then all cases would be a case of doubt. Here we're talking about where it was a little less than 3 months. And then, maybe there'd be some indication. And in this case, there wasn't an indication. And that's why we're going to say that it was a suffix. So now all of a sudden, we're getting into areas where we're more familiar with about women and pregnancy and showing and all that. And you see that the rabbis also took this under consideration, even though they didn't mention it earlier. Now they mention it, and it does seem to play a role here. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get back to the child. So we said that the child is okay, right? No doubt about they're either the first or the second husband. Okay, soon we're going to get to what happens when it comes to inheritance laws. Who do they inherit? Because it's not clear who's their father. But in terms of yichus, and it doesn't really matter. They're either this one's or that one's son, and it's all legitimate because they were all. If it was the first one, it was a legitimate marriage. If it wasn't the first one, then the second marriage was legitimate and all is good. And they were born from a legitimate marriage. So Rishon ra'ui liot kohen gadol. The first son born from this union of the Yevamah and the Yabam, potentially Yevamah and Yabam, we don't really know if they were or not, but the first son is totally fine. However, they're supposed to get divorced. But if they don't get divorced, right, because now we don't know, maybe there was no chayyiv of Yibum. What if they don't? Right, this came up. I know there was a discussion in one of the chats about this issue of forcing him to get divorced, right? Because in general, we know you don't really force the man to get divorced. This forcing to get divorced is no different than when they issue a chiyuv get, which is when they think the husband should be giving a divorce to the wife, and they issue a chiyuv get, and it's basically like forcing the husband to divorce his wife. But if he doesn't want to, in the end, he has to do it willingly. We can put him in jail. We can do whatever we want. They can beat him up, right? Which is illegal in most places, but they could try to do all sorts of things to get him to give a get, but in the end, right, he has to give the get willingly. Same thing here. It's the same idea. We say you're supposed to get divorced, but people often defy the law and don't really care. So if they don't get divorced and they stay married and they have another child, what's the status of that child? So that child is much trickier because at this point, maybe we know already that there's an issue and it's 50-50, let's say, right? Maybe the first husband had a child, in which case this is kareh. They're not allowed to be married to each other. She's married to her husband's brother. If there was an obligation of yibum, then it's a totally legitimate marriage. So this is what you would call a safek mamzer. Okay, so that's what we're going to say now. Sheni mamzer misafek. Okay, the second child is a safek mamzer because potentially the union was a forbidden union that you get kareh for, and then your kid's a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Ein mamzer misafek. We don't yet know what he's talking about, because what do you mean, Ein mamzer misafek? Of course, there's safek mamzer cases. So what does he mean? There's no mamzer out of doubt. Okay, we're going to have to understand what that means. My kamar, first question of the Gemara. What are we talking about? What does he mean? So Amar Abaye hachi kamar. This is the way Abaye reads the machloket. We're now going to see what opinion A is and opinion B, and then we're going to have Rava who flips what opinion A and opinion B is. Okay, so Abaye says, this is what we mean. Rishon ra'oi liyot kohen gadol v'sheni safek mamzer ve'asur b'mamzeret. If you're a safek mamzer, it's actually worse than a mamzer. Why is it worse than a mamzer? Because a mamzer can marry another mamzer. Okay, a mamzer lo yavo b'kahal, but can marry another mamzer. If you're a safek mamzer, you might be not a mamzer, you might be a mamzer. Right, so you have two sides of you. So you can't even marry another safek mamzer because what's the problem? They might not be a mamzer and you might be a mamzer. So you can't do that. So you're really stuck. So what he says is, right, ein mamzer misafek means a mamzer who's misafek can't get married. It doesn't mean there's no such thing. It means it's not a good situation and you can't get married. You can't marry a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, eino safek mamzer, ela vada mamzer. And then, it should be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So sorry, I explained it wrong. My mistake. Erase for a minute. When it says sheni mamzer misafek, what it means is safek. According to the Tanakama, sheni is mamzer misafek, and therefore asur b'mamzeret. That wasn't explained by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Sorry, my mistake. That's going to be Rava's explanation. Okay, they're going to flip, as I said. So what he says, he's explaining Tanakama first, which is sheni mamzer misafek means safek mamzer, which means like a classic safek mamzer can't marry a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, when he says ein mamzer misafek, what he means is ein no safek mamzer alavada mamzer mucha b'mamzeret. Now he doesn't really mean is a vada mamzer. Of course, not a vada mamzer. We know maybe 50-50. He wasn't a mamzer. But what he's saying is safek mamzer can get married to a mamzer. Okay, what he's saying is there's no different law for a safek mamzer. Ein mamzer misafek. That's why he says it like that. There's no mamzer misafek. Any safek mamzer can marry a mamzeret also. That's Abaye. Rava Amal, and he's just going to flip the opinions. Who says what? It's the same two opinions. Either a safek mamzer can't marry anybody, or a safek mamzer can marry a mamzer. So, and then the question is going to be what motivated each one to assume this is what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov meant, or this is what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov meant. We'll get to that after. Rava Amar Hachikam. He says no. The Tanakama said Rishon ra'oi liyot kohen gadol. That obviously they all agree. V'sheni mamzer v'adai misafek v'utar b'mamzeret. The second son is considered a mamzer vadai out of safek, meaning he's really a safek mamzer, but we'll treat him like a definite mamzer and we'll allow him to marry a mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov then comes and says, ein mamzer misafek means ein vadai mamzer misafek. You can't take a safek and treat him like a vadai because a safek can't marry. A safek mamzer, asur mamzer. Safek mamzer can't marry anybody. So again, just to simplify it, Abai says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov allows a safek mamzer to get married. And the second opinion, Rava, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't allow. And I'm focusing specifically on Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Obviously, whatever they say, Tanakama will say the opposite in each one. So now, Kamifla gave it to Rabbi Eliezer. What's their machloket? Why do they have a machloket here about what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said? Well, it all depends on this machloket between Rabbi Eliezer that we're going to see about Rabbi Eliezer. Ditna. It says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer omer, v'vada'an b'vada'an mutal. Okay, a vada mamzer and a vada mamzer. Vada means definite. Definite mamzer can marry each other. Vada'an b'sfekan, usfekan b'vada'an, usfekan b'sfekan, asur. But two safek mamzers, a safek and a vadai, or a vadai and a safek, okay, whichever order, the man, female, it doesn't matter, right? They can't marry each other. So only if you're a definite mamzer can you marry a definite mamzeret. That's it. Okay? That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Ve'elu hein sfekan. What are safek mamzer situations? Shtuki, asufe, v'kuti. Okay, a shtuki is a child. It comes from shatak. He's silent. If you ask him who his mother is, he knows. If you ask him who his father is, he's silent. He doesn't know. So it's where the mother is known, but we don't know who the father is. And then we have a safek mamzer, basically, because we don't know. Maybe it was a problematic relationship. A sufi is a child who was picked up off the street, and we have no idea who either of his parents are or her parents. And a kutir, the shomronim, those are the people with troubled lineage. Okay, you can read in flashback. I actually can't recall. She was going to write about the shomronim or the givonim, which we're going to talk about the nitinim also. Can't remember which one she chose to write about, but you can find it in flashback this week. Okay, why the shomronim? I don't want to spend time on this today. Why there were doubts about their lineage, right? There's different reasons given. You can look up sources on it. Okay, so Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, Paskins, we hold like Rabbi Elazar that we're strict. Okay, Safek can't marry Safek, all that. But Rabbi Yehuda says, when I said this halach in front of Shmuel, we always see Rabbi Yehuda, he was learning with Rav, and then Rav died, and then he went to learn with Shmuel, and he always brings Rav's Torah to Shmuel. Amarli, Shmuel responded to me and said, Hillel taught the following, and I'm going to go with Hillel. Asara yuchsin alumi Bavel. There were 10 different types of people who were miyuchasim or not miyuchasim, we'll see, right? Who came from Bavel. So, Kohanei, Leviye, Yisraelei, Chalalei, Gerei, Chalhurei, Mamzerei, Netinei, Shtuki, Vasufi. Okay, so Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Chalalim, which are problematic lineage from Kohanim who married the wrong people they weren't supposed to marry. Gerim, converts. Chalhurei are Avadim Meshucharim, those Avadim Knanim we keep talking about that were freed. Mamzerei, these are Mamzerei. Nitine, those are the Givonim from the time of Yoshua, okay, who pretended, who faked us out and then became Barshav Emayim and they drew water and all that, whatever, but they're problematic. You can't marry them. Shtuki. Shtuki is what we talked about before. Silent doesn't know, we don't know the father. Asufe, we don't know father or mother. Vikulam mutarim lavo ze bazeh. Okay, they're all permitted to marry each other. That's obviously not true. They can't all marry each other. But what it means is if you go down that list, like Kohanim can marry Leviim and Yisraelim, and Leviim and Yisraelim can marry further down the list, right? They can marry the Chalalim and Gerim and Avadim Meshucharim. Mamzerim can only marry each other. Netune, Shtuki, Asufe can marry each other also because they're Safek Mamzerim. So basically he says, well, I don't know why Rab Paskin like Rabbi Elazar when Hillel taught that you can. Okay, so now we have this Machloket Rav and Shmuel. Safek Mamzer, can they marry or not? So very simply, Abai and Rav are going to fall into line with one of each opinion. Abai is several like Shmuel. Tamar halacha ki Hillel. Umokil Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Basically, each one of them thought that we hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and each one of them held by a different either Rav or Shmuel. So each one tried to interpret Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov to fit with the opinion that they thought was the halacha. So Abai was lenient like Hillel, who said they can all marry each other, like Shmuel, who held like Hillel, and therefore he explained Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov was also lenient. Rava, several like Rav, held like Rav. Damar halacha ke Rabbi Elazar, who was strict, didn't allow Safek Mamzer to marry, and therefore Mokeh Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, okay, getting down to Amud Bet. So basically, they wanted to say, right, they each did it in order to fit it within halacha. How do I know that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov really does this, besides his motivation to kind of fit it in, but he also has a proof. Tanya, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, we have a guy who slept with many different women. We don't know what women, so he could have all these children floating around the world. Or a woman who slept around with many men. She has no idea what the pregnancy from which man it was from. So in that case, right, you're going to have a lot of problems with people like this. So they're going to all have children. We don't know who to connect them to, and therefore they can end up marrying their siblings, right, or people that are forbidden, and we're going to make a lot of mamzerim in the world. And on this it said, you understand zima as being mamzerim, and therefore we're going to have problems. Now, what does he call these people? Mamzerim. They're not really mamzerim. They're safek mamzerim because we have no idea who their parents are. So because of this, we're basically going to say, okay, so therefore, what do you see? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov called them mamzerim and understood this word zima to be referring to mamzerim, even though it's only safek mamzerim, and yet he called them mamzerim. That's a bias proof. What's Rabbi going to say to this? Rabbi amar l'cha hachi kamar zo mahi. Zima doesn't mean definite. It means we don't know what they take. It's called nochikon. When you take, right, it's like an abbreviated form of the words zo mahi, right? Zayin mem he, zo mahi. We don't know what this is, meaning it's a suffix situation. He's not saying it's vadai. He's just saying this creates doubt in the world. Doesn't mean doubtful mamzerim or definite mamzerim. Next. Because we talked about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're going to say something else. He said, Yeter ken amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, lo yisa adam. Yes, thank you. It's an acronym. Lo yisa adam isha b'medina zo, v'yelech v'yisa isha b'medina acheret. This is an interesting halacha. Don't marry a woman in one place and then leave that location, leave your wife there, go get married to another woman somewhere else, because right? In world without communication like we have nowadays, right, and without good records, the children will meet each other later in life. They'll have no idea that they had the same father because the father left the mother and went with somebody else. And therefore, that's a big issue. Is that really true? And now we're going to quote this very famous story. And unfortunately, today we don't really have time to discuss it, but I'm just going to kind of direct you to listen to Yoma Daf Yud Chet. Okay, it's in the second, and it's the end part of the Shiur. We taught it there and we connected this whole crazy story. It's hard to teach us without really getting into it, but we really don't have time today. Anyway, I'll mention a little bit, but you should definitely all go listen to the last, like sort of toward the end, somewhere around 35 minutes into the Shiur on Yomi 18, and you'll hear a better analysis of the story. But anyway, this is a crazy story. They say, wait a minute, you really can't marry a woman in one, like have a wife in one city and go marry a woman in a different area? When he would go away on business and he would get to the city of Dardishar, he would announce who's going to be my wife for a day. Okay, and he basically, the assumption of the simple reading of the story, before we interpreted it some other ways, but it seems like he got to a city and he said, who's going to be my wife for a night, so that he didn't end up with prostitution, and he married a wife fair and square and then divorced her the next day. Okay, yeah, if anyone will learn Yoma will clearly remember this story, very memorable. Okay, so Rav Nachman, not only did Rav do this, Rav Nachman, he also said, who's going to be mine for the day? He did the same thing. Very hard to understand how these two rabbis did such a crazy thing. It seems insane, like not really part of our religion to do that kind of thing and take a woman, right? It's like a one night stand, but a marriage, and then they're planning to divorce her. Seems very strange. What woman would want to do this? All sorts of questions raised about the story. Shane Rabbanan. So, and here they bring it up and say, well, what do you see? They went and had children in a different city, and they weren't worried that their wife was somewhere else. And we just said, you can't do that. Shane Rabbanan de P'kia Shamayu. Well, their names are very known. So if the woman had gotten pregnant that night from this rabbi, so everyone would know she got pregnant from Rav, they would call the son Rav's son, and then everyone would know he's Rav's son, and that's fine. So then the Gemara asks, wait a minute. I have some problems with the story. And as I said last time when we learned the story, the rabbis are going to ask these very detailed halachic questions about the story and how could it be like this? But I read that as it's the rabbis really asking moral questions and how could this possibly have happened? The way they ask these questions is through a halachic, right? That's the way they ask their questions. But I think it's that they're struggling with the reality of what on earth is going on here. So they say, how could they have done this? Forget about the issue of, having a child in another place. There's other issues. If you decide to marry someone, she has to wait 7 nikim, because this is a concern. This is why before marriage, women always wait 7 clean days leading up to the wedding, not necessarily once their period ended. So they would send messengers ahead of time. People would know that they were coming. So women would already count their 7 clean days, and those who were ready would kind of offer, oh, I'll marry you. Alternatively, you could say they didn't actually have relations with them. They just went into a room alone with them, which the rabbis jump at and say, what are you talking about? That's problematic in and of itself, especially, right? Like if you get married and the woman's in nida, you're not allowed to be in a room alone with her. What's this talking about? But anyway, that's an aside question. But they say, right, they just went into a room alone, and that would prevent them from going to, let's say, a prostitute, because if they have a woman nearby, that already kind of, right, it's like having bread in your basket. You don't necessarily need to eat it. You just know there's food there, right? You're calm about it. Okay. The whole story in and of itself is a crazy story. I don't really believe that it was meant to be, that they really actually did this. And particularly because they went, especially Shachnatzi was a place that was known to have terrible people. And the way I explained it there was they were trying to teach a lesson to the people of the city, and it had to do with Yom Kippurim. It connected with Masechet Yoma. Anyway, you can listen there. We don't have time. Okay. Tana. And like people have written about this story a lot. There's all sorts of, the rabbis also, the Ben Yehoyada has a very creative interpretation. There's all sorts of creative interpretations to what's going on here, because no one could really believe that the story actually happened and it was meant to be taken literally. Many Talmudic stories, by the way, are not meant to be taken literally. So it's not so crazy to say that. Okay, Tana Rabbi Eliezer, although you see that the Gemara took it literally, right? They did. So, well, what do you mean, right? But then they kind of said, well, maybe it didn't exactly happen as they thought. Tana. Oh, one more thing of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and then we're going to get to this Dinei Mamonot stuff, okay? Who gets the inheritance? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, now this is a clear critique of the story. Okay, they're not just randomly bringing this other statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but listen to what he says. Don't marry a woman when you're planning to divorce her, like the next day, for example, like these rabbis, man havil liyoma, meaning I'm going to marry you and then divorce you. Mishum shenema, don't plan evil for your friend. And he thinks you're planning something good for him, right? Don't plan on marrying these women. They think you're marrying them, and then you're going to divorce them the next day. That's not appropriate. Okay, so it seems to be a critique on what these rabbis did, even though maybe they felt like they were being honest because they said man havil liyoma, but still, one can't marry a woman and planning to divorce her the next day. Now we get to a bunch of scenarios. We'll just get started on them today about this child who we don't know if he belongs to the first father, who is the guy who died without children, or maybe with children, or the second. So remember, if it was the first, then who should inherit the son? The father. The son should get all of the inheritance. If he wasn't belonging to the first father, then who gets the inheritance? The brother who did Yibum, he gets all of the inheritance. So now we have these two people come in front of us. One is this child who's Safek ben Sheva, Safek ben Tisha. We don't know, was he born to the first father or to the second father, right, to the Yabam. So they're all fighting over, one says, oh, I was born to that guy. I'm his son. I get all of his money. And the brother says, no, I get all of his money. I was the Yabam. You weren't born yet. You're my son. So Safek Amar Ana Bar Mitada v'Nechsei Didi. Safek says, it's my money. I'm the son of the guy. V'Yabam Amar Ad B'Rai Didi. You're my son. Ad V'Leit Lach V'Lamiti B'Nechasayin. You don't have anything in this money. You have no claim. So this is a classic case of Have Mamona Mutal B'Safek or Mamona Mutal B'Safek Kolke. This is a classic case of two people claim rights to the same money. Nobody has any more proof over the other. We split it 50-50. Safek Ubnei Yabam Shabal Lachlof B'Nechsei Mitana. What if it's the Safek and it's that's the Safek ben Shiva ben Tesha. And then we have the Yabam dies also. And his children are fighting with him over the money of his own father, right? Of the guy he claims is his father. So Safek Amar Hu Gavra Bar Mitanahu, right? That guy who died, I'm his son. I get them all. B'nei Yabam Amrei, they say, no. Atachinua, you're our brother. Uminata Udilach Badan. You just get a portion of what we're going to share it. Like, let's say we're 5 brothers. You're the 5th. You're going to get a 5th, not the whole thing. The rabbis first in front of Rabbi Misharshia thought to say this is like a Mishnah that we're going to see at the end of Yevamot, which isn't a case of a Yabam. It's just a case of a child that we don't know who the father is. Okay, again, it was a case, let's say they got divorced and she got remarried right away and we don't know whose family he belongs to. Ditnan. He can't inherit from them at all because they say this is classic in Dinei Mamonot, besides Mamonot Utabas Safek Kolkin, which is one basic thing. But the flip side of that is if someone has the money in their possession, it stays in their possession. If you want to prove, you have to prove it. We're Vadai, you're a doubt, you don't get anything. So now says he's not the Bechor, by the way, because the Yabam, why would he be the Bechor? The Yabam had kids from another, right, with his wife, and it all goes by the father. He could have had other wives. So he's not the Bechor. Anyway, he can't inherit any of their stuff because he can't prove that right? They can just always say, oh, prove it that you're our brother. And they can't, right? Haim or Shimoto, they can inherit from him. I'm not going to get into the details about that because I want to stay focused. Now, the Hacha Ibcha, here it's the right. So now here it's the reverse, but the same logic. He has a definite claim to the money because either he has the money because he's his father's son and he gets the money, or he's one of their brothers, so he definitely has some claim on the money. They don't have a definite claim on the money because he could say, prove that, right? Prove that I'm not my father's son. And they can't prove that, which means that they don't have any, right? They don't have any rights to his potential father's money, right? They don't have definite rights to it. So there they can say to him, bring proof and take the money. And he could say to them, either scenario, he's got parts of the right of the money, and they only on half the scenario have rights to the money. If really he belonged to his father, then he gets all the money and they get nothing. So it seems to be the same thing. But Amar Lahu Rav Misharshia Midami. He says these are not similar. Why? What's the big difference? The case we mentioned in Yevamot Afkuf, they were Vadai. They clearly have claims to their father's stuff. He only maybe 50-50, he belongs there. But here, even he is a Safek case. It's true, he definitely gets some part of the money, but he doesn't have a definitive claim. He can't say, I know I belong to my father. I know I belong to your father. And he can't say that. So that he doesn't have a definite claim. It's true he has a definite right to the money, either which way, but he doesn't have a definitive claim. So that's not the same. They there had a definitive claim. They know they're their father's children, and therefore they get his inheritance, and he doesn't. But right here, there's no definitive claim. We'll give you a third case, because that was case number 2. We'll give you a third case that's similar to that Mishnah that you quoted before. So what's that case? It would be similar to if remember, his father dies, which maybe is his father, maybe isn't his father, then the Yabam dies. And now they're not fighting over the first husband's money, the first guy's money, the first brother, where they're fighting over the Yabam's money. Now there they have a definite claim because he's definitely their father. He doesn't have any definite claim because it's not clear he's the father. So there we can compare it to that Mishnah. Right? They say to him, bring proof that you're our brother, and then you can have. And basically, until you can bring proof, which you can't get anything. Well, last case for today. Now we basically take all the cases and kind of combine them together and come up with a case where the first case was they split 50-50, the Yabam and the son. Right? Once they split 50-50, then the Yabam dies. Now comes the child with a good claim to the brothers. What does he say? He says, B'nai Yabam Amre, right? So now, after they split it up, he comes with a claim. So first the B'nai Yabam say, Ay teraya de achuna atu shkol. Sorry, Amrle, right? So they say, that's what happens. He says, the 50-50 that your father took, I get rights to that also because I'm his son. So they say, what are you talking about? Prove you're our brother, and then we'll give you rights to that 50% that our father took before. And Amar Lehu, he says to them, the Safek, man of Shaychu, right? The man of Shaychu is, either way you look at it, I have rights to this. Because it's very smart. If you're my brothers, I at least get a portion of the 50% that, right? And let's remember, the first case was they split 50-50. So they split 50-50 in 2020. Then 2022, the Avam dies, and his stuff falls to his children. And comes the Safek guy, and he says, listen, of that 50 that he took then, I have rights to it as his son. And if you don't tell me he's not my son, I'm not his son, then I get all the money because then I belong to the first guy and it was all the first guy's money. So I want my 100%. Okay, it's a very good claim. Ibar mitana ana, if I'm the dead guy's son, habali palga de palagavuchan badai. I want the 50% that your father took from me. That was all mine. So Rabbi Abba Amarav Kam Dina says the deen was already done. He already got his 50%. And now if he wants to claim I'm your brother, he can't because they could say, go prove you're my brother. And he can't change anything. But Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Hadar Dina. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, he can go back and re-put it all back together and say, either I get the whole thing or I get at least a portion of the 50% as the son of that guy. So tomorrow, we're going to stop here. Tomorrow, we're going to get to, is this connected to another machloket? Why did they say this? And we'll get more detail into this. Okay, have a great day, everyone. We'll meet up tomorrow.